I'm sad to say, this will be my final story. An old friend once told me something that gave me great comfort.
These violent delights have violent ends.
After the shocking final episode of Westworld Season 1, we've got 6 big questions Season 2 desperately needs to answer. I'm Executive Editor Andy Hartup, and I'm joined by Entertainment Editor Lauren O'Callaghan, and we're here to discuss the implications of that final episode and what we want to see in Season 2.
Welcome to Westworld. Live.
So the first question is, are the hosts in control of the park now?
Yeah, surely they are, right?
Are they?
Yeah, because they've killed off the entire board. He's clearly spread the he's spread the dysfunctional programming to sort of wake them all up, I think.
Yeah, but we didn't see that, and this is HBO, and as we know, even when you see a dead body, you can't exactly count on that's what's happened. So, there's a good chance we've seen the start of the hosts taking control of the park, but I don't think that necessarily means that come Season 2, that's going to be the situation we find the park in.
Here's a question for you. Do you honestly think that we're going back to Westworld in Season 2?
I think we're going to have to, because I get the appeal of going to one of the other worlds, and I definitely think that will be a part of Season 2. But if we don't go back to Westworld, it's like a completely different show. It's not Westworld. It would be Medieval World or Roman World.
Samurai World.
Or Samurai World. So I think Season 2 will be set partly in another world, but it will also partly be like Westworld. We would have a kind of crossover.
Linked into this, so we know that a lot of the board is going to be shot up, so there's really not going to be a board of Delos anymore. Does Delos own all the Westworld parks? Because there's clearly a number of them. So I wonder, is each individual park owned by a different board, potentially? Potentially,
and potentially Ford wasn't as in control of all of them as he was with Westworld, because obviously we saw in Season 1 he was quite closely in charge of Westworld, but considering how much work these parks take, you could argue that there are equivalents of him in charge of all the other parks as well, which would actually be a good way to have a kind of another main protagonist for the second season, because it could be, another head of a different park.
Yeah. Although, surely no one has got Anthony Hopkins' gravitas.
I mean, that's a hard performance to follow.
Really.
I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah. You're the new Ford. Oh, God. I mean, anyone picking up that role must feel pretty intimidated by it. So, in conclusion then, do we think the hosts are in control of the park? You don't necessarily think they are. I think they probably are, and that might be the last we see of Westworld.
Time undoes even the mightiest of creatures. Just look what it's done to you.
Let's move on to the next question then. And what made William become the Man in Black?
Yeah, so this might seem like a bit of an odd one for most people, because I think there's an argument to be made that we actually found that out in the season finale. But personally, I'm not convinced, because it just doesn't seem like that's motivation enough. Like, the characters were really different. Like, William was like this sweet, like, loving person who saw these things in Dolores, and the Man in Black is completely not. Like, even borderline evil. I mean, he rapes Dolores in the first episode. And, okay, a massive time period is between those two characters, but I want to see how he got to that point, because I don't think losing Dolores and becoming obsessed with Westworld was enough to change him that much.
I mean, it's definitely something that Season 2 could explore. I think for me, one of the big things that made William become the Man in Black is that scene that you see in the last episode where he rediscovers Dolores doing her loop in
Sweetwater.
Sweetwater, that's it. And she doesn't recognise him. And she's going off with either another host or another guest who picks up the tin of beans that she drops. And I think that damaged him psychologically, because he'd invested in that one journey. When he'd been there, he basically fell in love with Dolores while they were on the train and all that. And she fell in love with him too, because she repeats that when she's talking about the Man in Black. But to have that love for someone and then to suddenly realise that person doesn't even remember you anymore. I mean, that must that must be very difficult to deal with psychologically. So I suspect that's why he goes back, because he becomes obsessed with the park. And I think the maze is maybe a metaphor for him trying to discover that love that he lost. He's obsessed that there's something at the centre of the park that will explain away what happened to him psychologically. So
it's like he's still trying to find her.
He is.
He's still trying to find her. It's just the maze has replaced her. And I'm okay with that as an answer, but I kind of want to see that journey a bit more in season 2, because I feel like they can use that as a justification, but we got so little of it in this episode because obviously it was taken up with the big revelations.
Yeah. Here's a thing for you, right? They keep telling him, the man in black, the maze is not for you, like it's not meant for you.
He wouldn't listen.
But what if it is meant for him? Because it's the consciousness of the host, right? The maze, the centre of the maze is the consciousness of the host. And perhaps that is what he was looking for in Dolores, because he wanted her to realise her consciousness so that she remembered and still loved him. I mean, initially at first, maybe that's what he was looking for, and then he just came back because he got bitter and twisted by it. But who knows?
Yeah, I think definitely that's a big part of it. But your consciousness belongs to you, so her consciousness doesn't belong to him in any way. Like, he can have a vested interest in it, but it does have to be for her.
He can't accept that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Someone altered your storyline. They gave you a new one. Escape.
So the other thing I want to find out in season 2 is Maeve really conscious? Does she actually have free will? Because we found out in the final episode that her escape plan was actually part of her new story.
Mm-hmm. It's part of Ford's new story.
Well, yeah.
I think the clues might be in looking at that data pad that Bernard was holding, where he was looking at her narrative and he flashed up escape. So he says, this is part of your new narrative. You're meant to escape. I think the proof of that will be in whether or not it was in her narrative to then get off the train and look for her host daughter again. I personally think that she has achieved consciousness because she chose to get off the train. I think she was probably meant to discover the outside world because Ford wanted to expose the fact that the hosts are conscious. It all plays into his narrative of the hosts are conscious, therefore Westworld belongs to them.
Right, so like start a rebellion within Westworld, but then send like an agent out into the real world to kind of like, okay.
To say, well, I mean, to potentially be discovered as a host and to have her acting like as human, but in the outside world so people can see it for themselves outside of Westworld. So I think potentially the fact that she's gained consciousness and subverted or broken her programming to go back in is probably proof of that. But you're right, it's a really, really interesting point, and season 2's bound to pick up on that. Yeah. Like it has to know.
It really fascinates me more than a lot of other stuff in this show, because the performance here by Tandy Newton is just incredible. And you really feel for her, like when she's so passionate and she's like, this is wrong, we want to escape. And you really are backing her up. And then, you're slowly coming to the realization that actually, as much as she wants this, it actually might not be coming from her.
Mm-hmm. It was when Arnold died, when I suffered, that I began to understand what he had found. To realize I was wrong.
So I guess that leads us on sort of neatly to asking, was Ford really a good guy all along? I mean, there was a moment like at the start of the series where you thought, Ford's a bit of a mysterious character. He seems a bit sinister. And then, oh God, he's made Bernard kill Teresa. He's definitely a bad guy. And then we finally come back to, well, in the finale, we find out that his new narrative is essentially setting the hosts free and giving them their own world, which is it's not what Arnold wanted for them. Arnold wanted to stop the park from opening initially. But maybe it's Ford making up for that because he's seen Arnold's point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struggling to see Ford as the good guy after everything he's done. But there is sense in what he's said, he has done some terrible things, but I think Arnold was too much of an idealist. Like, okay, fine, you don't want to open the park, then what? Like, you've created this thing and you can't go back on it. Whereas Ford's much more practical, and once he kind of changed his mind and came round to the way of thinking of Arnold, he probably looked at it and went, okay, but how are they going to survive? This is how. They need to learn how to fight their enemy. They need to do these things. Okay, it's a bit of a shame it took 30 years, and during those 30 years they were treated quite badly.
Yeah, pretty badly.
And I'm still not 100% sure why he needed to kill Teresa if he was a good guy.
I think Teresa was trying to go about it the wrong way. She was looking to remove him along with
Right,
Hale.
but to murder her...
But she was... like, good guy's a very relative term here, because he has asked Bernard to murder people in the past, and he's schemed and plotted in that way. But I think his intentions for the hosts are good. I don't think he likes humans very much.
No.
So, I genuinely think he's not a good guy, but I think his intentions for the hosts were what they were, and anyone who got in his way of that plan. I mean, it's 30 years of his life. He just reacted to protect it, I think.
Arnold gave you that early on. Do you remember? A desire to create something of lasting beauty.
So the question then, did Arnold plan for Ford to help the hosts all along? Like, was that his plan when he shot himself in the head, or when Dolores shot him in the head? Was his thinking, look, sure, I can have Dolores kill all the hosts, fine, but Ford can rebuild them. What if, the only thing that's going to change Ford's mind is if I'm dead because I can't be replaced? But the idea of Arnold, Arnold's idea lives on.
Yeah.
That's what he implanted in Ford's consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, this hadn't occurred to me until you said, and I actually think it's quite a good idea, because I don't know what Arnold was thinking in terms of, obviously that wouldn't stop the park opening because all the hosts can be brought back to life. So the idea that actually he wasn't necessarily trying to do that, he was actually trying to change his friend's mind, does make more sense. But at the same time, that's taking quite a big risk. I feel like maybe the grief of losing his son is mixed in there as well. He couldn't bear the thought of seeing another child, like it said in the show, Dolores is like his substitute child. He couldn't bear the thought of seeing another one of his children suffer. So he kind of used this as an excuse to kind of end things, and also maybe kind of give them a future that they could strive for.
I think whether or not we see the answer to this in season 2 is dependent on what they want season 2 to be.
Yeah.
So if it's going to be set in another park and it's just going to reference back, then we might well find out the answer to some of these questions. Like Ford's, if it's in Samurai World, for example, they reference Ford's incident or Ford's legacy or something like that. So it will tell us a lot about whether or not Ford is perceived to be a good or a bad guy. But it's going to be very difficult for it to explain whether Arnold planned for this or not, but it's quite an interesting thing to think about for the end of the season, right? Yeah,
no, absolutely, because at the end of the day, it all comes from that point. Everything we're seeing, kind of, that's the source, as it were. So yeah, I think what I would really like to see is for us to have a new world in season 2, but make sure it has links to Westworld, because that's kind of the basis for everything. So the last big question is actually one of the simplest, which we've been asking ourselves since the show started, which is, where is Westworld? People literally can't stop talking about it. Is it in space? Is it underground? And we actually don't have an answer.
I haven't got a clue. All right, a lot of people think it's underground, like a big underground
I think it's
thing.
Underground.
Okay, fair enough. You would have to go pretty far underground, especially if all these worlds are stacked on top of each other. That's like a massive shopping mall underground, really, isn't it? So, but it's very possible, I think, if you were looking to build it anywhere on Earth, that's where it would be.
Yeah.
I personally, there's two things. One, it could be in space. It could be just floating around. I don't know how you get trains to get there, but hey, maybe there's a shuttle and you land in the shuttle and then it takes...
Maybe the train's just the last bit of the journey, yeah.
Yeah, it could be. Or, one of the things I desperately wanted to happen in this episode, and it didn't the last episode, was for Maeve to sort of get to the top of the lift or get onto the train and then come out the other side and find a Dark City sort of moment. Have you seen Dark City where they're trying to find out what's at the edge of the city and he smashes down the wall and there's nothing but space and void outside it?
Oh, right, yeah.
I just sort of wanted to have one of those revelatory moments where there's nothing outside Westworld and it's like a construct or something like that, but maybe that was too much to expect for season 1, because then you very much limit yourself for season 2.
Yeah, I really like that idea though, because I've always kind of questioned, why people have such the reaction they do to Westworld. Because to me, if you're living in a future where this kind of technology can be created, then it would be in every home or every office, or at least to a certain extent. So why would you be in such awe of these robots?
I think it's because of the freedom that them being like a world built exclusively to contain them comes with it. That I don't necessarily think people who visit are necessarily in awe of the technology, but they're in awe of the fact that they're so lifelike and they can do what the hell they want to them.
It's how they can behave towards them, not how the robots behave towards them.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I really want to know the answer to this question, part of me doesn't actually want it to be revealed, because it's like you were saying, it then puts Westworld in a box.
Yeah.
It constrains it in some way, and right now, like, not knowing is most of the fun.
Do we think it'll get answered in season 2? I doubt it.
I don't think it will, because if you'd have asked me would it be answered in the finale of season 1, I would have said yes, but now we know it hasn't. I don't think they'll do it at all.
Okay. And there's that's the end of our questions, but there's all sorts of other tiny little questions that might get answered in season 2, like where's Stubbs? We didn't see him die. Where's Elsie? We saw Bernard choking her, but is she really dead? Maybe so. There's a lot of other questions of sort of half missing characters and
what happened to Logan?
Yeah.
Is he still naked on a horse somewhere?
I mean, he might be like an old man naked on a horse wandering around Westworld. We just don't know. So, as ever, if you've got any questions you want answered, then drop them in the comments below, and we'll get around to answering them if we can. And look out onto the site for more coverage of Westworld Season 1 and in the future for Westworld Season 2.